Focus of this slideshow will be on the geography of North Africa. We're going to start out this slideshow by identifying the 5 countries of North Africa here. And you can see them all pretty easily, I think, on the map, but I'll really quickly go over them for you. All right, if we call Egypt number 1, then I can put right over here on the eastern side of this area a number 1 right there in Egypt, okay? And then Libya is next at number 2 right here. Tunisia is the smaller one towards the top, okay? That'll be number 3. And then Algeria is number 4. It's pretty large. I think it's easier to see. Okay, and then Morocco is the smaller one up here in the dark blue, number 5. Okay, so these are the 5 countries that we'll be talking about when we talk about North Africa. The next thing I want to talk about are some of the major physical features here, and I'll show them to you on the map so you kind of know what's happening here. But the physical features, we'll start off with the Sahara. The Sahara, as you can see here by this map, this whole orange area is the Sahara Desert, all right? It's a very, very, very large desert, okay? It's, as a matter of fact, it's the world's largest hot desert. There are some larger cold deserts in places like Antarctica, okay? But this is the largest hot desert in the entire world, right? And so, you know, it's extremely warm, extremely dry. It's a big part of Egypt. Like Egypt is 96% desert, right? And in some of these places, it's so hard to live in. It doesn't rain for years at a time in some places in the Sahara Desert, right? So you can imagine how dry it must be. And there are sandstorms that come up and blow around, and you know, you got sand coming up in everywhere, and that's kind of a dangerous situation that you don't want to be caught in. And then you also, it's very, very hot. It can get very, very hot during the day, and then at night it can get very, very cold. So it's just a dangerous place to be stuck in for long periods of time, especially without shelter or anything like that. Most of the life in the Sahara is around the oasis. An oasis is defined here as a place in the desert where water is found. So where you can find water, where there's you know, an area that gets rain, different things like that, that is an oasis. So you can see plant life and animal life way more active in the oasis, as well as human lives being around an oasis as well. Okay, so it's more of a lush area in the middle of the desert. The next area we're going to talk about here is the Atlas Mountains, and the Atlas Mountains are right up here, drawing them onto the map there. Okay, and the Atlas Mountains are between the desert and the sea in Morocco, Tunisia, and Algiers. So you can see it going right across this whole top left corner kind of North Africa. And what this does is the Atlas Mountains are a source of orographic precipitation. So the clouds, the wind, all that kind of stuff comes in through here, and it's normal wind with moisture in it and all that kind of stuff. And as it hits those mountains, it goes up to where it's a little bit colder. And when it gets colder, the water inside of these winds condenses and falls. And so all of the rain falls on the coastal side of these countries. And then on the other side, when the air goes over top of the mountains, all of the moisture is out of it, and it's just very dry air going across the Sahara Desert. And so this Atlas Mountains and the orographic precipitation is a big reason that the Sahara Desert is as dry as it is. However, on the coast, up above the Sahara Desert, it's very lush and very nice and wonderful. So that's that. And then we've got the Nile River running over through here, okay? And the Nile River is, it brings water to this strip of land. And this strip of land is mostly through Egypt, all right? And so what it does is it allows Egypt to have the civilization that they've had, right? Egypt is the gift of the river. We'll learn about in the next thing, or in the next slideshow. So, I mean, it's all about the river. This oasis created by this river in the desert allows Egypt to have a strong country, right? And so Every single year, the Nile River would flood in its history and put rich silt on the banks. Silt is just a rich soil that's really easy to grow stuff in. Okay, and so it was doing that every single year, and then the country of Egypt decided to build a dam, and so it no longer floods, which is good and bad. We'll learn about later on. All right, so the last piece that I'm going to talk about is this peninsula right here, the Sinai Peninsula, which if we look on the map, it's pretty small here, okay, but it's kind of within that green circle there. And the Sinai Peninsula is mountainous, it's desert, it's separated from Africa and connected to Asia over there, right? But it is part of Egypt, and so we kind of count it as part of North Africa, even though it's separated and actually technically part of the Asian continent. So the question we always ask, and we have to ask when we're talking about the geography of a place, is where do the people live? What is the population density? Where are all of the people? And this is a really interesting region because if we look, it's really, really dark in some places on this map, and then it's really light throughout most of these 5 countries, right? And so where do the people live? Well, first off, in North Africa, the population is increasing really, really rapidly. It's moving up quickly, and the cities are where this is happening most. Okay, the cities are really large, and they're usually in good places. And usually outside of the cities, the land is too dry to possibly support people because it's out in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and that's why there's all of this white where nobody is living, because it's just too dry to possibly feed and support the people. And so the people live near water. We can see up here living near the coast in that area that gets the orographic precipitation. We can see this big dark section in Egypt where the Nile River is. Right? These are the areas where you're going to see most of the people living in North Africa. Right? So they're living again near the oceans, near the rivers. They need the water for crops. They need the water to survive, to be able to drink. They also need the water to transport their goods from one place to another. Half of all the North Africans, half of everybody in North Africa lives in Egypt. It is a very, very dense population along the Nile there. You can see it's almost all black, right? And so almost all of those people that live in Egypt live right near the Nile. As you can see, there's so much, that 96% that's desert. There's no color to that at all. It's pretty much all white. All right. And so that's kind of crazy. Now, some people do live in the desert. I mean, I know it doesn't look like very many live there, but some people do live out there, and most of those people are nomads, right? And a nomad, the definition of a nomad is just a person or people who move from place to place without a permanent home. So they're not living in a place all the time. They don't have a house. You know, they might carry with them a tent or a yurt or something like that and have either temporary housing where you're only living there for a little bit, or semi-permanent housing where you move from season to season. And so you know, it's also in this area, it's too dry to farm, and so instead of farming, instead of trying to make crops, they are doing away from these oases, they are animal herders instead. So they keep their animals together and move them with them and keep them alive, and that is how they survive and eat. Take some time to write out this checkpoint. The question is based on what we've seen so far out of these physical features. Which physical feature is the best feature for the people of North Africa, and which is the worst? And we can think of economic, historical, where people want to live, anything like that. Which is the best, which is the worst, and why do you think that? Again, opinion, can't get it wrong. As North Africa has been growing, more than half of the people in North Africa live in cities. It's mostly in cities, right? And so over the last 100 years, farmers have started leaving their villages and moving to cities as these places have been industrialized, right? And so what they're doing, what they're trying to do is they are trying to look for jobs and a higher standard of living, just a better life, to have hospitals and schools nearby and all the things that you need. All right, and so people have started to urbanize, started to move towards cities, and the cities have grown larger. Cairo is the largest city in all of North Africa. About 20% of all Egyptians live in Cairo. And so that's a lot of people. It is the economic, political, and educational center of all of North Africa. However, these large cities, that can cause problems, right? Many of these cities are in an area that is desert, right? And so they can have trouble providing services to their people that the people need, like water, clean, fresh water, things like that, right? The other problem is not enough quality housing, which leads to overcrowding in the area. So you can see these really big cities. You can see up on the top on this map here, see Casablanca, Algiers, Alexandria, Cairo, both in Egypt. Okay, these are some really, really large cities in the area. So they have increased a lot. That's the size of them. And then over here, you can see how, or right here, we can see how much these cities are projected to grow in the 15 years from 2010 to 2025. All right, the next part we are going to talk about is the environmental issues in North Africa. And so if we look at it, a lot of the environmental issues kind of stem from this right here, which is the Aswan Dam. Okay, the Aswan High Dam in Egypt has created a lot of different problems for the environment and for the people. And so the whole point of it, the reason that it was seen as successful and all that kind of stuff, is that it allows way more people to irrigate. It allows that water to be flown, or put the flow to change to help out more people and get it to more people. However, it also stops the dangerous flooding that happened every single year. However, the problem was the floods, they naturally dropped silt and improved the land every single year so that the farmers could come in and they could farm and the soil was rich and ready to go. Now, that silt isn't there anymore, and so the farmers have to use chemical fertilizers instead of this naturally recurring fertile soil. And so that has problems of its own. So if we look down at the second one here, the second one is water pollution. And this happens because they have to use those chemical fertilizers on their land. And so they throw the fertilizer on their land, it rains, it washes eventually back into the river, back into the Nile, okay, and then that kills fish. Not only is that bad for people because they have to eat the fish and it's bad for the fish, okay, but it's bad for people who make a living by catching the fish and selling them to people. All right, so it's just bad all the way around. Lake Nasser is another thing right here. That's Lake Nasser that was created by that dam. All right, so it was this big area that flooded because the river was stopped. And so it's always flooded, and now it's a giant lake. And the problem is, if you have a big standing body of water, that's the kind of place where mosquitoes lay their eggs, and now it's a mosquito habitat. And so these malaria-carrying mosquitoes live and breed on Lake Nasser, which is bad for people, obviously, the disease that they carry. And also, they had to move a lot of stuff. They had to move over 100,000 people from their homes and have them move somewhere else because the area that they were living in was going to be flooded by this lake. All right. And so the other thing they had to do is they actually had to cut some temples, some ancient temples. They took them and they cut them into pieces and moved them to a new location because otherwise they would be underwater. And this new location is now a kind of like a tourist destination. All right, and so there were some negative impacts based on this Aswan High Dam that was built there. The other big problem is desertification. We talked about desertification before. When you cut down the trees, okay, then now the roots of the trees are not there anymore, and all the good soil can just blow away in the wind or wash away in the rain, and you're stuck with desert. You're stuck with not good soil, bad, sandy stuff. All right, and so that can happen, but what about in this kind of area where there are no trees or there are very few trees? Well, it can also happen here. If you take out the roots and you allow the top of the soil to be loose, it's going to do the same thing. And the way that happens is through overgrazing. People take their animals through and they eat up and pull out all of the roots and eat them from all of the plants there, even though they're just grasses or shrubs or whatever, and that loosens up the soil and makes the desert larger. Okay, and so creates a desert where there wasn't any, which is bad for people and bad for the environment. So with desertification being so bad and us trying to, or us essentially growing the desert, not intentionally, but doing that, okay, we need to figure out how can we fix the desertification? How can we stop the growth of the desert? So the first thing you need to do is take that at-risk land, that land that's right on the edge of the desert, and it has to be set aside. You can't bring your animals out there and eat all the shrubs or anything like that. Okay, it just has to be, whether it's a national park or however you do it. The other thing that can be really, really beneficial that Algeria came up with first in the 1970s is to build something called a green wall. And this is a picture of a green wall right here. Right at the edge of the desert where you still have some vegetation and you still have good land, it's a good idea to build a belt or a wall of trees and vegetation, of plants that put their roots down and keep those trees and vegetation there so that that soil stays in place and does not blow away and create larger desert. And if you can build a wall right there, then you can still use land on the other side of the wall for grazing and things like that, because the desert's growth has stopped. So if you overgraze, you can cause desertification, but it's way more likely on the edge of a desert than it is, in between other vegetation. Okay, and so this will protect the land. It'll hold the soil in place. It keeps the desert from expanding. So this is kind of the plan in many parts of Africa. Take a moment to write out the answer to this question. Who are these green walls really important to, and who should pay for them? As far as resources, there are two really major important resources in the area of North Africa. They are water and oil, which are the most important resources in the area. You have to have the water, and the battle over water and who gets it is a huge issue in the area. Who gets control over it? Can Uganda create a dam and hold back water that would be going to Sudan? Okay, can Northern Egypt create a dam and hold back water that would go to other areas of the region, right? Okay, and so these are the really important issues that are coming up all the time. And so in Western Egypt, they do have a lot of water, and they're ready to go on it because they can use that Nile River. And so farming is a really big export industry. Cotton, olives, and citrus fruits are their major important exports from farming. We hear a lot about Egyptian cotton. That's really a high quality cotton. So the other thing is oil. Oil we've seen being important in a lot of different places. All 5 of these countries have and export oil and make money off of it. Algeria and Libya have by far the largest amount. They have a lot more than the other countries. Okay, but most of the oil found in this region is found out in the Sahara, which again we've learned is not a good place to try to live. It would be hard to work out there, and so what people have done is they built pipelines that run into the Sahara and will ship that oil out, will pump that oil out through the pipe out to the coast, and on the coast they will put them into ships and ship them all around the world to make money off of this export. Another important resource was man-made, and you can see it right down here. It's in red. It is the Suez Canal. So that piece of land was the issue. That piece of land did not allow European countries to get through to Asia and to the east coast of Africa and everything through the Red Sea. All right, it didn't allow them to get through there without going all the way around Africa. And so in Egypt, some European countries got together and built the Suez Canals in 1869. And what the Suez Canal does is it's a river dug out of it. You can see a picture of it right down here. And so it allows these large ships to pass from the Mediterranean Sea, which we know where that is, to the Red Sea right along the coast of Africa there. And so it allows these large ships to come through, which makes the Europe to Asia trip are thousands of miles shorter because they don't have to go all the way around all of Africa. And so every single year there's tons of large ships going through, and more than 3,000 oil tankers go through this Suez Canal every single year. It's good for the world because not having to go thousands of miles saves a whole lot of money because you don't have to pay the people to ship that much longer. And so everything, all the goods that they transport can be much cheaper. So good money for the world, right? And it's also good for Egypt because as each ship goes through, they collect a toll or they collect a fee for every single ship that goes through. So Egypt makes money and the world saves money. A lot of this area's success can be attributed to it being at the crossroads of the continents. Okay, so while the Sahara Desert is hard to move over, it's not impossible to go over. And so they've set up caravans, they've set up paths and things like that that people can go through there. And so a lot of cultural ideas and goods and traders and all these different things have moved over this region because it is a connection between three major continents. It's a connection between Europe, between Asia, and between Africa. All right, and so the connection to the other two continents it's right there. You can see it in all of these different things. The religion and the language came in from Southwest Asia. The Arabs brought in Islam, brought in the Arabic religion, okay, came across with all that information, and then through the Mediterranean Sea and into the northern part of North Africa, the European languages came in, and those are often second languages in a lot of these places. So it's a mixture of the European influence coming from the north and the Asian influence coming from the east, connecting and meshing all up with the indigenous influence that was already there, and that's the mixture that we have in the culture of North Africa.